The day began with the soft hum of rain against my window. It was a sound I had grown accustomed to over the years, a melody unique to Seattle. The cozy apartment I called home felt like a sanctuary, small but filled with memories, each corner a testament to the life I'd built for Mike and me. As the gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I stretched and glanced at the empty space beside me. For a fleeting moment I thought of George. It was always like this. The mornings brought with them memories I had no control over. George, with his charming smile and boundless ambition, had swept me off my feet all those years ago. But that same ambition had taken him to Europe, leaving behind a life we were supposed to share. He left me to pick up the pieces, to explain to our son why his father's dreams didn't include us. At first, the bitterness had consumed me. The betrayal, the loneliness, it felt like drowning. But Mike had been my lifeline. He was just a child then, but his laughter, his questions, his very existence gave me purpose. Over the years, the pain dulled, replaced by a quiet acceptance. George was part of my story, but he no longer defined it. Mike did. He had grown into a remarkable young man. At 22, his passion for photography was infectious. He had a gift for seeing the world differently, capturing emotions in ways words couldn't. I often wondered if his art was his way of processing everything. His father's absence, our struggles, his own journey. Today was no different. As I padded to the kitchen, still wrapped in the warmth of my robe, Mike was already up, bustling about with his camera bag. His enthusiasm was palpable. "Mom, you've got to come with me to the park," he said, his eyes alight. "The morning light is perfect right now. It'll be gone soon." I hesitated. Mornings were my quiet time, my moment of solitude before the day's demands took over. But how could I say no to that face? His passion was contagious, and I couldn't resist being part of his world, even if just for a morning. "Give me 10 minutes, I said, smiling. His grin was all the reward I needed. By the time we left the apartment, the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle, the kind that made everything shimmer. The park was a short walk away, and as we strolled I watched Mike, his long strides, the way he constantly adjusted the strap of his camera bag, his eagerness to capture the world. He reminded me so much of George in those moments, but where George's ambition had been isolating, Mike's was inclusive. He wanted me to see the world through his eyes. We reached the beach just as the clouds began to part, letting the sun peek through. Mike was in his element, his camera clicking away as he darted from one spot to another, capturing the play of light on the water, the gentle sway of the trees, the footprints left by an early jogger. I couldn't help but tease him. "You know, you spend more time looking through that lens than actually living in the moment." He paused, lowering his camera to meet my gaze. "This is how I live the moment, Mom. This is how I make it last." His words stayed with me as we walked. There was a wisdom to him, a depth that always caught me off guard. As he snapped a few more shots, he started talking about George. It wasn't uncommon. Mike had questions, curiosities about the man who had left us. But today his tone was different, softer. He shared memories I hadn't realized he held onto. The way George used to hum while cooking. The way he'd toss Mike in the air and catch him with an exaggerated laugh. "He wasn't all bad, was he?" Mike asked, his voice tentative. "No, he wasn't," I admitted. It was the truth. For all his flaws, George had given me Mike, and for that I would always be grateful. Mike smiled, a small, wistful smile, and leaned over to kiss my cheek. "Thanks, Mom. For everything." It was such a simple gesture, but it warmed me to my core. He had a way of doing that, of reminding me why every struggle, every tear, every sleepless night had been worth it. As we walked back to the car, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't felt in years. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. We strolled through the park at a leisurely pace, the early morning air carrying the faint scent of damp earth and grass. Mike walked ahead of me, his camera slung over one shoulder, his hands constantly adjusting the strap or fiddling with the settings. He had always been this way, consumed by a quiet intensity whenever he was immersed in something he loved. Photography had become his passion, his way of interpreting the world. I marveled at how naturally it seemed to come to him, as if the camera were an extension of his own body. Every few steps he would stop abruptly, crouching low or leaning sideways to frame a shot. His eyes scanned the landscape with precision, searching for the interplay of light and shadow that would bring his vision to life. I watched him from behind, amused by his focus but also deeply impressed. He moved with purpose, completely in his element, as if the rest of the world had melted away. As I observed him, a sense of pride swelled in me. This was the boy I had raised, no, the man. In moments like these, I saw not only his talent but his resilience, his ability to create something beautiful out of a life that had not always been easy. Watching him work reminded me of the strength we had both drawn from each other over the years. The morning light was indeed stunning. It filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the path and illuminating the dew that clung to the grass. The park seemed alive with quiet activity. Joggers passed by with rhythmic steps, a pair of ducks glided across a small pond, and a family played fetch with their dog in the distance. Mike's camera clicked steadily, capturing fragments of these moments that others might overlook. At one point, he turned his attention toward me, his focus shifting from the landscape to my presence. It was a familiar moment. He had done this before, gently coaxing me into his photographs despite my reluctance. For years, I had resisted the idea of being captured, preferring to remain behind the scenes. I never saw myself as someone who belonged in the frame. Yet, whenever he pointed his camera at me, there was something about his gaze that made me feel seen in a way that was both humbling and affirming. This time was no different. He lifted his camera, and I instinctively tried to wave him off. But he persisted, his movements gentle yet deliberate, as if to say that this was not just about the photograph but about the connection between us. Slowly I relented, letting him guide me into the soft morning light. Standing there, I felt vulnerable yet oddly at ease. The way he moved around me, adjusting angles and focusing the lens, was tender and reverent. He saw me not just as his mother but as a person with a story worth telling. I could sense his care in the way he framed the shots, his intent to capture not just my outward appearance but the strength and resilience he believed I embodied. When he finished, he stepped closer, a soft smile playing on his lips. His expression was full of warmth and pride, and in a rare moment of unguarded affection, he leaned in and kissed my cheek. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of gratitude, love, and the unspoken bond we shared. The warmth of his touch lingered, and I found myself smiling, my heart full. As we continued our walk, the bond between us felt almost tangible. The sunlight, now brighter, seemed to reflect the closeness we shared. The morning, with its gentle sounds and vibrant light, felt like a gift, a reminder that even amidst life's struggles, there were moments of pure connection and joy. By the time we reached the car, I could sense that Mike was already planning our next adventure, his mind buzzing with ideas. The morning had started as an ordinary walk, but it became something much more profound. It was a testament to how life, with all its complexities, could still offer moments of simple yet profound connection. Back at the car, Mike seemed to be brimming with ideas, his energy as infectious as the bright morning light. I had barely settled into my seat before he began talking about our next stop. His passion was undeniable, and I couldn't help but smile at the way he spoke about photography as though it were the most important thing in the world. It wasn't just his hobby. It was his voice, his way of making sense of the chaos and beauty in life. We drove in comfortable silence, the hum of the engine blending with the occasional clicks of his camera as he snapped shots through the car window. I found myself glancing at him now and then, marveling at how much he had grown. It felt like just yesterday he was a little boy with a disposable camera taking blurry pictures of his toys. Now he was a man carving out his place in the world with quiet determination. The next stop was the beach. The tide was low, and the vast stretch of sand glistened under the morning sun. The sky above was an endless blue, and the soft rhythm of the waves created a tranquil backdrop. Mike stepped out of the car first, his camera already in hand, and gestured for me to follow. He had that familiar look of determination, the one that told me I wasn't just here as an observer. Sure enough, as we walked along the shoreline, he started setting up his tripod. I watched him work with practiced ease, adjusting the angles and testing the light. Then he turned to me, his expression both expectant and encouraging. He wanted me in the frame again. At first I hesitated. It wasn't easy for me to step into that role, to see myself as someone worthy of being captured. But there was something about the way Mike looked at me that made it impossible to refuse. It wasn't just about the photographs. It was about the way he saw me, not just as his mother but as a person with a story of her own. I let him guide me, following his quiet instructions as he adjusted the angles and asked me to move this way or that. At first, I felt awkward, unsure of what to do with my hands or how to hold myself. But Mike's calm, steady presence had a way of putting me at ease. He encouraged me to relax, to just be myself, and slowly, the tension melted away. As the session continued, I found myself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Standing on a beach, barefoot in the sand, with my son treating me like a professional model. But there was something freeing about it too. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about how I looked or what others might think. I was simply present, letting myself be seen through his eyes. When he finally lowered the camera, he had that satisfied look that told me he'd captured something special. He showed me a few of the shots, and I was stunned. The images were raw and unfiltered, but they were beautiful. They didn't just show me. They reflected everything I had been through. The struggles, the resilience, and the quiet strength that had carried me forward. Mike seemed pleased, not just with the photographs but with the moment we had shared. As we packed up and headed back to the car, I felt a sense of gratitude that was hard to put into words. It wasn't just about the pictures. It was about the bond we had forged over the years, the unspoken understanding that no matter what life threw at us, we would always have each other. By the time we returned home, the morning had already started to give way to afternoon. Mike was eager to review the photos, his focus shifting back to his work. I watched him from across the room, his brow furrowed in concentration as he studied each image with care. It was a reminder of how much he had grown, of the man he had become. For a moment, I stood there quietly, taking it all in. The beach, the photographs, the connection we had shared, it all felt like a gift, a reminder of how far we had come and how much we still had to look forward to. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting a golden glow across the room as Mike sat at the dining table, his laptop open in front of him. He was utterly absorbed in his work, clicking through the images he had taken earlier in the day, his brow furrowed in concentration. I stood nearby, watching him quietly, marveling at how completely he immersed himself in his craft. Mike had always been this way, pouring himself entirely into whatever held his attention. It was something I had admired about him since he was a child, the way he could block out the noise of the world and focus so intently on the things he loved. His passion for photography had grown into something far beyond a simple hobby. It was his way of seeing the world, of connecting with it on a deeper level. Drawn by curiosity, I approached him and leaned over his shoulder. The screen was filled with the morning's work, images of sunlight filtering through the trees, the sparkling waves at the beach, and candid shots of me that I hadn't realized he had taken. Each photo seemed to hold a piece of the day, a snapshot of a moment that might otherwise have slipped away unnoticed. As he scrolled through the photos, I found myself captivated by his ability to capture beauty in the ordinary. His talent amazed me, and I felt a swell of pride knowing that this was my son, someone who had taken life's challenges and turned them into art. Then, suddenly, a new series of images appeared on the screen. My breath caught as I recognized them instantly, photos of me during one of my pole dancing sessions. I froze, caught between surprise and disbelief. I remembered those moments vividly. Taking up pole dancing had been a deeply personal decision, one I had made during a period when I needed to feel strong again. It had started as a challenge to myself, a way to push past the limits I had built in my mind. Over time, it became something more, a source of empowerment, a way to reconnect with parts of myself I thought I had lost. The images on the screen were striking. They showed me in motion, my body poised with strength and grace, illuminated by soft studio lights. I hadn't known Mike had taken these photos. At first, I felt a wave of self-consciousness. The idea of being seen in such a vulnerable state was unsettling, and yet as I looked closer, something shifted. The photos didn't just show my physical movements. They told a story of resilience, determination, and the quiet power that comes from reclaiming your own sense of self. There was a raw honesty in the way he had captured me, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey I had been on. Mike glanced up at me, his expression tentative, as if he were unsure of how I might react. I could see it in his eyes, the care he had taken, the intention behind each shot. These weren't just photographs. They were his way of showing me how he saw me, not just as his mother but as a person who had faced challenges and come out stronger. For a long moment I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, and I could feel the sting of tears welling up in my eyes. Without thinking, I reached out and rested a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of gratitude. He didn't say anything, but the slight smile that played on his lips told me he understood. Later, when Mike had stepped away, I returned to the photos. I sat down at the table and scrolled through them slowly, allowing myself to really see what he had captured. Each image felt like a reflection of a part of me I hadn't acknowledged in years. They were strong, raw, and unapologetically real. As I sat there, a wave of emotion washed over me. For so long, I had focused on being everything for everyone else, putting my own needs and desires aside. But these photos reminded me that I was more than the roles I played. I was a woman who had fought for her happiness, who had found strength in the face of adversity. When Mike returned to the room, I stood up and walked over to him. He looked at me with a hint of curiosity, his head tilted slightly as if to ask what I was thinking. Without a word, I leaned in and kissed him softly on the forehead. It was a simple, tender gesture, but it carried with it all the gratitude I couldn't put into words. "Thank you," I whispered in my mind, though the words didn't leave my lips. I didn't need to say it aloud. The way he smiled at me, the way his eyes softened, told me he already knew. That evening, as the sunlight faded and the room grew quieter, I looked at the photos one last time before closing the laptop. The images weren't just pictures. They were a reflection of everything I had been through and everything I had yet to become. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, not just with my past but with who I was in the present. As I closed the laptop, Mike cleared his throat softly. "Mom, there's something else I want to show you." He reached for his camera bag, pulling out an elegantly wrapped package. I hadn't even noticed my birthday approaching, but Mike, as always, had remembered. "You didn't have to," I started, but he shook his head, that gentle smile I knew so well playing across his features. "Open it," he insisted, pushing the package toward me. Inside, I found carefully selected clothing, pieces that spoke to both elegance and comfort. There was a beautiful emerald green dress that I immediately fell in love with, and beneath it, wrapped in tissue paper, delicate lingerie that made me blush. The thought and care behind each item touched me deeply. I thought. Mike hesitated, then continued. "I thought maybe we could do another shoot. Something that captures who you are now. Strong, confident, beautiful." The suggestion would have made me uncomfortable just a few months ago, but after seeing how he had captured my pole dancing sessions, I found myself nodding. There was something liberating about being seen through his lens, about having my story told through his artistic vision. I took the new items to my room and changed, starting with the lingerie. The silk felt cool against my skin, and as I looked in the mirror, I felt a surge of confidence. The emerald dress followed, its fabric flowing perfectly. Mike had chosen well. Everything fit as if it had been made for me. We headed to the dance studio where I practiced pole dancing. The familiar space felt different today, transformed by Mike's artistic vision as he set up his equipment. The morning light streamed through the high windows, creating a golden atmosphere that seemed to wrap around everything it touched. The session flowed naturally. The confidence I'd gained from months of pole dancing came through as I moved, the new clothes adding an extra layer of elegance to each pose. Mike worked silently, his camera capturing every moment, every gesture. The trust between us made everything feel natural, artistic, pure. As the session drew to a close, I felt exhilarated. The combination of dance, photography, and beautiful clothes had awakened something in me, a sense of complete self-acceptance I hadn't felt in years. Mike lowered his camera, looking through the last few shots with satisfaction. I walked over to him, still catching my breath from the last sequence of poses. Without warning, Mike leaned in and kissed my lips softly. The moment was brief but filled with tenderness, an expression of the deep connection we shared. When he pulled back, his eyes were full of emotion. "You're beautiful, Mom," he whispered. "I hope you can see yourself the way I see you." Later that evening, after Mike had left to meet with his gallery curator, I found myself drawn to the photos again. He had already edited some of them, and seeing myself through his artistic vision was transformative. The images captured not just my physical appearance, but the strength and grace I developed through pole dancing, enhanced by the beautiful clothes he'd given me. Without hesitation, I printed my favorite shot and hung it on my bedroom wall, right next to the earlier pole dancing photograph. The two images told different parts of the same story, my story. Looking at them side by side, I felt a deep sense of peace and acceptance. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled. For the first time in years, I felt truly excited about what lay ahead. Life had taken unexpected turns, but standing here now, surrounded by the evidence of my journey and my son's love, I knew that every step had led me exactly where I needed to be. Tomorrow would bring new moments for Mike to capture, new stories to tell. And I was ready for all of it, one frame at a time. Later that night, after dinner, we returned to my apartment. The warmth of the wine and the intimacy of the evening lingered in my veins. Mike was still talking about the exhibition, his passion evident in every word. I watched him move around the living room, gesturing animatedly as he described his vision for the opening night. As he spoke, my mind drifted to the changes in our relationship. It had been such a gradual transformation, from the bitter days after George left, through years of healing and growing closer, to this new understanding we'd found. The boundaries had shifted so subtly that I hadn't noticed at first. Perhaps it started with the photography sessions. The way Mike saw me through his lens was different from how anyone had ever seen me before. He captured not just my image, but something deeper. My vulnerability, my strength, the parts of me I usually kept hidden. Each click of his camera felt like an intimate conversation. When had our embraces started lasting longer? When had our kisses moved from cheek to lips? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It felt as natural as breathing, as inevitable as the tide coming in. The rest of the world might not understand, but in our private universe, it made perfect sense. Mike paused in his enthusiastic planning and turned to me. The look in his eyes made my heart skip. There was such tenderness there, such complete acceptance. He crossed the room and sat beside me on the couch. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, taking my hand in his. I considered deflecting, but honesty had always been our foundation. "About us," I replied. "About how we got here." He nodded, understanding immediately. His thumb traced patterns on my palm. "Do you regret it?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how quickly and certainly the answer came. "I'm just trying to understand it." Mike leaned closer, and I could feel the warmth of his breath. "Maybe some things don't need to be understood," he whispered. "Maybe they just need to be felt." Our lips met in a kiss that was both familiar and new, gentle yet demanding. When we parted, I saw in his eyes the same mix of emotions I felt: love, desire, a hint of uncertainty, but above all, complete trust. In that moment, I realized that trying to analyze our relationship through conventional lenses was pointless. What we had transcended ordinary definitions. It had grown from years of shared pain, mutual healing, and deep understanding. Each photograph, each tender moment, each kiss had been a step on this path. The world outside might judge, but they hadn't lived our story. They hadn't felt the slow, inevitable pull that had brought us to this point. In the gentle light of my living room, with the evidence of our journey hanging on the walls around us, nothing else seemed to matter. I reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines that had matured from boyhood to manhood under my watch. Here was my son, my photographer, my confidant, my lover. All these roles merged into one precious person who knew me better than anyone else ever had. "We should get some rest," Mike said finally, standing but keeping hold of my hand. "Tomorrow's another day of preparation for the exhibition." I nodded, but neither of us moved to separate. The night stretched ahead, full of possibilities, and I found I wasn't ready for it to end. Not yet. Not when we'd finally found the courage to acknowledge what had been building between us for so long.